lovely enemy. Chapter 1. "I won't go," Maggie O'Neill responded obstinately, averting her gaze from her friend's entreating suggestions. "It's like asking me to walk into a Bengal tiger's cage with a sirloin roast tied around my neck," Jana argued, her black eyes beseechingly soft. "But Maggie, it's exactly what you need. Recall how, throughout our school days, we would sneak away to the ranch and look forward to riding and having picnics by the river?" "My memories are a little different," the gaunt brunette remarked, frowning. She sat on the bed's edge and examined her brown denim jeans legs. "I remember being put over Clint Collins's knee for riding that surly stallion of his, and being locked in my room for going on a picnic by the river with Jerry Broom." Her little pal defended her brother, saying, "Clint did warn you about high tide. You are aware of Jerry's attempted actions. With you, Clint understood he was too old to put his confidence." The recollection of Clint rescuing her from Jerry's violent grip and the sight of blood where his large fist struck the younger man's nose made Maggie flush. Nor had it been a pleasant lesson that followed. Leaning back, she exhaled. That had been the case for all time. Since their first encounter when she was 8 years old and he was 19, and she hurled a baseball bat at him, she and Clint had been enemies. She was reminded by Jana that it was a long time ago. "You're 20 now, and it was all right when we went down to spend a week with Clint and Mama last summer, wasn't it?" "Of course it was all right. He was in Europe," Maggie burst out. "This time your mother's in Europe and Clint's home, and Lita's just dumped him and he's going to be an absolute pain in the neck." Jana responded, "I think you should go because of this." Maggie just stared at her. "Jana, old friend, have you been tippling the brandy bottle again?" "Well, here you are, just getting over that rat, Philip," Jana replied. "And there he is, just getting over that ratess, Lita. Haven't you ever noticed that although your brother and I are probably very nice people when we're separated, we seem to turn rabid when we come face to face?" Maggie inquired calmly. "The last time he threw me into the river, fully clothed, I hit my embarrassment on a rock," she said to the wide-eyed girl. "You went and kicked him," Jana answered, arduous within the shin. "He called me an idiot." "Well, what would you call somebody who tried to stone a rattlesnake to death from 4 feet? Jana raised her arms. "Honestly, Maggie, when you get around my brother, you lose every ounce of sense you have." "There you are once more." "Well, that's okay." She rested her chin on her elbows. "Talking about it is pointless anyhow. We both know that Clint won't let me go to the ranch without you." "He will, indeed. I questioned him." "What did you tell him?" Maggie's green eyes sparkled as she asked with suspicion. Jana gave a shrug. "That you and Phil had split, that's all." Quietly, she said, "Just that, not how we broke up." "Maggie, I promise, I'd never treat you that way." Her smile was forced. "It wasn't my intention. It struck me a little harder than I had anticipated, I suppose." Jana happily added, "Clint said you could work as his secretary while she's on vacation and have a paid working holiday." "It would be the best medication you've ever taken," he claimed. "And knowing Clint, he'll add a teaspoon of arsenic just to flavor it," Maggie said. "Arrogant, hard-headed, bossy," Jana reminded her. "You are between jobs." Maggie moaned. "If I were drowning, you'd toss me an anchor, wouldn't you, my bosom buddy?" "Oh, Maggie, I'm offering you a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Spend 3 weeks with the Sunshine State's most eligible bachelor, a handsome, wealthy, and attractive man." Maggie exclaimed, "I think I'm going to be sick," as she looked out the window at the blossoming trees. "Haven't you ever had a romantic thought about Clint in all these years?" Jana held on. "Sorry to disappoint you, but no. The best cure for a broken heart is to get it broken again." Maggie said, "Golly gee, Jana, look at the pretty bird on the limb here. Isn't he just too gorgeous?" "Okay, all right. Will you visit the ranch at least? Next to hell, it's my very favorite place when Clint's there. It's pretty on the ranch right now. All the wildflowers are in bloom." Jana sighed. Clint's always out on the range somewhere with the cattle or the field hands, and you know he almost never gets to the house before dark. And there's always hope that he'll get captured by rustlers and held for ransom until my vacation's over, right? Maggot smiled. Right, Jana chortled. Maggie never was quite sure why she chose to ride the bus. Maybe it was because it brought back so many happy memories of her early years, when she had taken the huge, comfy bus from her parents' house in Atlanta to her grandparents' house in South Georgia. After that, the drive to Jana and Clint's family's Florida property was uneventful. Maggie's gaze was pulled to that long, level stretch of land with the tall oaks and chinaberry trees providing shade for pine trees, pecan orchards, and large farm homes. This was where she had spent her early years, galloping across these meadows accompanied by Jana. Typically, Clint trailed closely behind her as she leaned down over the horse's neck. She would throw back a challenge to Clint and then push her mount on, the wind cutting into her face. When she confronted the tall guy, there was always a flash of pale green in his eyes, and he always gave her enough rope to hang herself. She couldn't help but smile at the recollection. The boundaries of their partnership had never really been defined by her and Clint. Their conversation may grow heated, but it was typically pleasant. However, it had never actually been nasty or malevolent. They were the eternally awkward pair, constantly making fun of each other and acting cautiously around one another, as though they were holding an unstable ceasefire and worried it would collapse at any moment. Clint intrigued ladies, but he was too tough to ever be considered handsome. Maggie was resolute from the start to avoid becoming one of those unfortunate moths attracted to his flame, even though he carried them around on his arm constantly. He never wasted his charm on her, so she was glad to be able to withstand it with ease. She had never been entirely certain of her response to Clint in a relationship of that nature. Her fear of it drove her to perform small miracles to keep it from ever happening. She heard a swirl of discussion and snapped back to the present, in time to see the faces of those across the aisle, fixedly gazing out the window. A rider approached the bus straight on a black stallion that shone in the sun like silk, and the bus slowly came to a stop. It didn't take long for Maggie to figure out who was mounted. Even without the self-assured angle of his range hat and the khaki work clothes that seemed to be an integral part of him, the man's tall, comfortable arrogance was obvious. The bus driver grinned and opened the door, and he reined up at it. "Man, you can ride," he said with a laugh and a grateful shake of his curly black head. With an uneven smile, Clint Collins remarked, "I've had my fair share of practice." Maggie was approaching the front of the bus in her powder blue pantsuit when his dancing green eyes caught sight of her, and he arched a slack eyebrow at her. "Thank God you're still tomboy enough to wear pants, Irish," he added, casually removing the mask with the pejorative moniker she had grown up with. "I can't make it to the bus stop in time. Some fresh livestock are being tagged. Join in." "Hop on?" she muttered. "But my luggage?" he asked the man. "The driver can drop it off in town, can't you?" "We'll get it later." "I'll do it," the driver said. "On condition if I ever get 2 days in a row, you'll teach me to ride a horse like that." "I am the owner of the C-Bar-R," Clint affirmed. "You're always welcome. Maggie, please board." She didn't have to turn to see that the muffled chuckle coming from behind her belonged to a couple of youngsters occupying the seat behind hers. Her shoulders went straight. Certainly, there was no way out of this without turning into the topic of conversation for the remainder of the drive into town. He stretched out a lean, brown hand, which she accepted. "I haven't been on a horse in a year," she said. In his cutest Tarzan accent, he added, "Step up on my boot and swing your leg over." And she thought she could practically see the adolescent's swoon. With little difficulty, she hauled herself up behind him, but the unfamiliar contact was unsettling, and she had to cling tightly to his firm waist to avoid falling off the large horse. Her whipcord muscles were so strong that it felt like she was pressing her fingers into solid steel. "Are you ready, Maggie?" he questioned behind his back. She muttered, "All set," in a quiet voice that wouldn't go past his ear. "Be free to ride off into a cloud of dust, leaving your adoring public in awe as you make your dramatic exit." As he prodded the stallion into a leisurely canter and rode away across the field, she felt his chest tremble beneath her touch. "If this isn't dramatic enough for you, Irish," he continued with arrogance, "I'll put Whirlwind into a gallop." She wrapped her slim arms around him and gave it her all. She spoke hurriedly, "Oh, please don't, Clint. I'll be good." He gave a deep laugh. "I anticipated you would." "While I'm heading to the feedlot, I'll stop by the house," she said. "You sure picked an unusual way to meet me," as she observed the horse make a path through high grass. "It wasn't planned," he remarked nonchalantly. "I just happened to see the bus and I figured you'd be on it." That puzzled her. It seemed like Clint always knew when she was coming. He did always. He seemed to have an inbuilt sense of her presence. She fixed her gaze on that wide, unwavering back. "I appreciate you allowing me to attend," she muttered. "Jana mentioned that you required employment," he casually answered. His tone tightened as he continued, "And I happen to be between secretaries." It was obvious that Lita had been the last. She looked out over the long horizon, which was peppered with scrub palmettos, pine trees, and red-coated Herefords, the little white dots on their faces in the distance. A smile unintentionally appeared on her face. "Jana and I used to play cowboys and Indians in those fields," she said. "I always had to be the Indian." He looked down at her slacks-clad leg. He remarked, "You still dress like one." "I've hardly ever seen you in a dress, Irish," she moved agitatedly. "They're a little out of place on a farm, don't you think?" she murmured. It was the same old debate. He would never stop criticizing her for liking pants. "I hadn't planned on using you to tag cattle and bale hay," he said. She took a deep, furious breath. "My clothing choices are my business," she retorted. "All you have to worry about is if I can type and take dictation." Abruptly, he reined in and partially turned in the saddle, contorting his towering frame to meet her gaze. His pale green, narrowing eyes were ominous. In a kind voice that cut worse than yelling, he said, "I'll remind you once that there's a line you don't cross with me, little girl. Your cocky partner might have grinned while taking back talk, but don't expect the same courtesy from me. I believe you understand when I say that a woman is only useful to a guy once." She did, and there was nothing that could have stopped her cheekbones from turning red. She averted her gaze. Silently, he examined her, his gaze following the subtle features that front him. He asked abruptly, "Why do you screw your hair up like that?" Her teeth were clenched. "It keeps it out of my sight," she firmly retorted. "And keeps a man's eyes turned the other way," he said. "Irish, how did that city boy ever break through the ice surrounding you? Utilizing a blowtorch?" That caused her emerald eyes to flare and pierce him. "Would you rather I'd have come in a slinky, skin-tight dress with my face plastered in makeup, batting my eyelashes at you?" she questioned with a grin. His bold, slow eyes followed her face, her soft mouth, and finally her youthful, full curves. "You once did that," he recalled softly, looking directly into her confused, shocked eyes. "When you were 17, and I suddenly became the star in your young sky after Jerry Broom threw you over." The recollection felt like a fresh cut. He'd make sure she never forgot it. She also couldn't forget how, that amazing summer, she'd followed him over the property, running after him shamelessly and coming up with excuse after reason, until at last he'd had enough and had confronted her with the crush, shattering her pride into 1,000 hurting pieces and forcing her into hiding. She kept the rejection deep within her psyche. never really coming to terms with it. One of the main reasons she battled him so hard was to keep her fury safe, high between them. Her gaze fell to the large chest in front of her. "That was 3 years ago," she mutely remarked. "And Philip is there now," he continued. His slow, deep voice had a note that eluded description. "Isn't there?" She gritted her teeth. "No," with an agonized murmur. "There isn't." "Did Jana not inform you that we would be splitting up?" He narrowed his eyes. "My sister withholds all information from me." "So, Irish, you threw him over?" She faced that accusatory glare head-on. "I caught him with one of my bridesmaids after the rehearsal," she informed him, going into a motel room together. He looked intently at her. "Were you that cold, that he had to find another woman to warm him?" She recoiled. She exhaled. "Damn you. I may have assumed that you would see all sides of the story but mine. With us, it has always been that way." With something profound and peculiar in his eyes that scanned hers, he mutely remarked, "It's always going to be that way because you don't want me on your side. For some reason, you want a damned wall to stand between us. What in the world are you scared of? With your reputation, you can ask me that?" she mocked. A lazy, sarcastic smirk brushed his cold, heartless lips. "You make yourself look good, little girl." "Maggie, you don't even physically arouse me. I could give you 11 years, in my opinion. Never have you." His gaze moved over her youthful form. It would be like making love to a snow sculpture. Her face remained neutral, letting him know how much he could hurt her would never work. "I thought I came here to be your secretary, not your whipping boy," she replied quietly. "Or do you expect me to pay for Lyda's sins, along with my own?" She observed his jaw muscles twitching menacingly, and his eyes narrowing. Carefully. "My God, you're asking for it," he said. She straightened and rode as far away from him as she could without hurting him. "You started it!" "I can also finish it," he remarked sardonically. She averted her gaze. She bit off. "I told Jana it wouldn't work. If you'll kindly take me to the house, I'll get a cab back to the bus station." He snarled. "Running away, Irish? You're good at that." Her bottom lip quivered. She cried out, "I won't be crucified by you!" With a whisper, "Oh God, I hate men, she said. "Cheats and liars, all of you." As he turned deeper in the saddle, his thin hand grasped the nape of her neck and pressed her forehead into his broad shoulder. He questioned her in the ear. "How many men were there before you found out?" She let out a sob. She said, 4, 5, I lost count. We were going to be married just 2 days after. He said I wouldn't melt in a blast furnace," she stated in a raspy voice. Her tiny hand curled up against his arm's heated muscles. And he was right. I could not have felt that way about him. She took a deep, weeping breath. His fingers gripped her thin neck more tightly. Gently. "How old was he?" he inquired. She forced herself to stop crying. 27. Experienced? Very. "Maggie, was he patient?" he inquired. With a gentle exhale, she closed her eyes tightly. "He took it for granted that I knew. Well, that I—" There was a sound of agitation as his chest descended with a deep rise against her. "It's better this way, Irish," he whispered in her ear. "Better to find him out now than after the wedding." "Clint, I apologize for jumping," she started. His cheek was warm and rough against hers as it moved. "Little watering pot, dry up. Emma will be standing on her head, wondering what happened to us, and I have cattle to tend to." "All right. Now what?" Yes. She forced a meek grin on his face. Clint, I'm sorry about Lyda. He had a closed but not furious expression. He lightly nudged her nose with his forefinger. Let's go home. He pivoted to the saddle horn once more and gently nudged the stallion into a canter. Until they reached the expansive white-frame ranch house surrounded by a grove of pecan and oak trees, he remained silent. At the white fence at the front porch, he let her down. He cut a striking figure, tall in the saddle and ramrod straight, perched on the black steed. He lighted a cigarette and silently studied her for a considerable amount of time. She questioned, uneasy, "Must you stare at me like that?" As she shifted under his bold, in-depth examination. "I feel like a heifer on market day." His pale eyes flashed something nasty. "Innocently, I'm not putting in any bids," he answered. "One of the boys will go get your bags. Emma is going to grab you some food. When I get in tonight, I'll go over everything I need done." She felt shivers down her spine at his abrupt and unexpected coldness. They had been imaginary foes for years. However, this felt authentic. He gave her the impression that he detested her. "I still think it might be better if I went home," she stated. "You'll persevere," he retorted angrily. "I can't get a replacement at this short notice, and I've got correspondence backed up to the eaves with a sale day coming up." She screamed, "Orders, Mr. Collins. Orders, Irish. Are you going to stop calling me that? You know how much I detest it. Own it by all means. If it helps, hate me as well," he asked with a devilish smile. "I don't give a damn, and you know that too, don't you, little girl?" Turning on her heel, she strode past the gate and onto the long white porch, adorned with flower pots full of blooms and a huge porch swing and rocking chairs.